Hello, everybody. I'm Cindy Jordan, and I'm on the board of directors of the Walnut Creek Library Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Live from the Library this evening, which is a series of free evenings with authors, scholars, community leaders, and entertainers. I want to thank our Live from the Library sponsors this evening for this season, Minuteman Press of Lafayette and the Friends of the Walnut Creek Library. And on behalf of the Walnut Creek Library Foundation, I want to thank each of you for your support. You support the foundation by being here this evening, and some of you provide financial support as well. That's important because even though these programs are free, it does cost money to put them on. If you're already a donor, thank you so much. And you can become a donor this evening by putting a few dollars in the tip jar at the back table, or by visiting the Walnut Creek Library Foundation website at www.wclibrary.org. The library will have closure announcements leading up to 8 p.m. Please don't be alarmed. You'll be able to get out of the library at the end of the program. So tonight, we are so happy to welcome Seattle-based author Elise Hooper, who will be discussing her new novel, The Library of Lost Dollhouses. And prior to publishing her first novel in 2017, The Other Alcott, Elise spent several years writing for television and online news outlets and teaching high school literature and history. She's a familiar face to our live programs, having been here previously as part of the book launches for 3 of her books: Learning to See, about photographer Dorothea Lange; Angels of the Pacific, about the World War II nurses known as the Angels of Bataan and the Filipino Resistance; and Fast Girls, about the first integrated female track team in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. You will definitely want to read The Library of Lost Dollhouses after hearing Elise's presentation tonight. And then I encourage you to delve into her backlist, where you will learn more about these extraordinary but often overlooked historical women. So now please welcome Elise to the podium.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you so much, all of you, for coming out tonight to talk about dollhouses, which may be a topic you wouldn't have really expected to be interested in, but I am really hoping to surprise you tonight because no one is more surprised to be standing up here talking about dollhouses than me. This has been a real adventure. I'm so grateful to all of you for coming to hear me, and thank you so much to the Walnut Creek Library Foundation for hosting me. It is always a treat to come here. When you read off the number of times I've been here, I mean, I sort of can't believe it. Right? Wow. Time is passing us by. And sure enough, I have 5 books out now, and the Library of Lost Dollhouses, the newest, is a little bit different from the 4 that came before it. I write books about women whose stories have been overlooked. Believe it or not, there's a lot of material out there for me. Actually, sometimes people are surprised by that, but anyway. My 4 books, The Other Alcott, Learning to See, and Fast Girls, and Angels of the Pacific, are all based on, they're what we call biographical fiction. They are books about real women during real events. Angels of the Pacific might be a little bit of a bridge between these two because technically my nurse characters in that novel, I did make up. They're sort of composite characters of the real women who were the Angels of Bataan. But my first 3 are certainly based on real women. So when I started the Library of Lost Dollhouses, this was actually COVID. I started writing this book. I had turned in my manuscript of Angels of the Pacific, a novel about World War II. It's about the first American women to serve on the front line of a war and then to be taken as prisoners of war. A heavy, big topic. At this point, this is fall of 2020, and I'm kind of like, okay, I need a little bit of a palate cleanser. I need to change things up. And I really couldn't rely on any of my usual tricks for finding new things to write about. I couldn't go to the library. I couldn't visit museums. I just couldn't really travel and talk to people and do that. That is literally what I do usually to figure out who and what I'm going to write about next. So really my first project after turning that Angels of the Pacific in was cleaning up my office, because whenever I've hit a deadline, the detritus that's sort of accumulated over the race to hit that deadline is substantial. And so I'm cleaning up, and on the floor of my office is this old family dollhouse I have. In fact, I will move ahead. There it is. And that's what it looked like. So this is a dollhouse that we believe was built for my great-grandmother, who's up there in the sort of sepia-toned photo. We think it was built in about 1895. And I was using it in summer of 2020 as a bookshelf on the floor of my office, because actually dollhouses make for pretty good bookshelves. I mean, there were paperbacks lining every room. And if you look closely, that dollhouse is actually a mess. I mean, the wallpaper is peeling. I had, as a girl, drawn on it. That dollhouse had been through 5 generations of girls playing with it, including my own 2 daughters. So there is a picture of me with my 2 daughters. Gosh, they were so little. My mom, and this is my grandmother. So these are all the women who have played with this dollhouse. It's not a fancy dollhouse. It's pretty rustic. It was actually built by a family friend for my great-grandmother. But as I was looking at this dollhouse, I thought, boy, this is really where my creative life began. Because as a girl, I spent hours in front of that dollhouse, murmuring little stories to myself and moving things around. I mean, there were times that mice, not real mice, but little tiny mice lived in that house. I at some point had sort of little dolls. I didn't love dolls being in it. I really just liked the dollhouse and moving furniture around and kind of almost populating it with imaginary ghosts, people in there that I would talk to. And it's also, I learned to sew to service this dollhouse, to knit. I learned to build things. I remember very clearly making a little lamp out of a button and a marble and the top of a toothpaste, like the little crenellated top of a toothpaste. That's the lampshade. I mean, can't you see it? It made perfect sense to me as, an 8 or 9-year-old. So the dollhouse taught me to look around the world and sort of see possibility. Like anything can be repurposed to be in a dollhouse if you're creative enough. And so, nearly 40 years later, I'm looking at this dollhouse and thinking, gosh, this is really sort of where it all began. So this is what I'm going to write about next. I'm going to write about dollhouses. Okay, what am I going to write about? I mean, I still had this huge sort of vast world in front of me of what am I going to write about? So I decided I am going to restore this old dollhouse to really, I was going full like Daniel Day-Lewis method actor of I am going to get in the head of a dollhouse maker by becoming one myself. Granted, I wasn't fully making this dollhouse, I was sort of restoring it. And at the same time, I was going to do a bunch of historical research to turn up what I hoped would sort of be some interesting history that I could use. I also want to make a point here that my grandmother in this picture, with that beautiful dress, I just love this picture of her. She's surrounded by these tiny little petite point rugs that she made. She made all of them, she designed them all herself. I have about 5 of them, and they are so unique. I mean, they could be in a museum. They're gorgeous. The scale on them is tiny, and I know this right now because I am working on some little rugs of my own that are not to that scale. I mean, if you know anything about needlepoint, they're on like 14 point something or other. That is probably about 28 or maybe even low 30s. It's tiny. But she made these because she was a miniaturist herself. So I have this in my DNA, is basically what I'm trying to tell you. She had built several dioramas in her house, what I remember so clearly as a kid, because they had electricity in them, and I could go and sort of climb up on stools and peer into these rooms that she had built that were sort of different historical periods, and each of them had these rugs in them, and I was just enchanted. And without realizing this, I think I've always been chasing that for all these years since. But so I felt like, okay, I have a little bit of this in my background. I'm just going to lean in and really become a miniaturist here on my own. So as I restored, I did some historical research, but really, it was no small feat. I mean, obviously, if you've done any big house restoration projects, those are much bigger, but this was still like, I had my work cut out for me. I was working in the garage. I took off all that old wallpaper. My grandfather had put it on. I took out everything, and I got it down to its most basic, and I started rebuilding it. And what I've learned is like glue is a really big part of my life now. I have about 13 different types of glue in my house that all have a very distinct use in my mind. And glue takes a long time to dry. Don't let anyone trick you. So while I would be waiting for glue to dry, which I never wait, by the way, that's a big part of my problem. I still dive into the next project and glue's everywhere because I don't wait. But as I was waiting for primer to dry or glue to dry, I was also at the same time working on my history of dollhouses. And really, people have been making miniatures for centuries. In fact, if you go to like the Met in New York, and I should put some photos I've taken in the Met in here, but people used to make little tiny miniatures in sort of service of God and Jesus. Like if Jesus ever comes down, here's a tiny little bed for him. Truly, a tiny bed exists in the Met that someone built for little Jesus if he ever comes and visits. So people, in all different cultures, people have been making miniatures to serve all different kinds of purposes, worship, celebration, and then there's just sort of collecting and really almost like showing off. And that is sort of the Western angle of dollhouses, interestingly enough. The first real dollhouse we know of was commissioned by a man, a Duke of Bavaria in the 1500s, and people were intrigued, especially women. And so has anyone seen Petronella Ortmann's dollhouse? Yes, in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. They're actually a couple, and interestingly, they're all owned by women named Petronella. I don't know what that's all about. But these are not sort of what you think of as dollhouses today. These were known more as sort of baby cabinets is what they were kind of called. And they were in real cabinets. And they didn't look like dollhouses from the outside, but then you would open them up. And inside, these women were wealthy women who basically were like, if I can have this in miniature, imagine what my real house looks like. Because they were filled with everything from, precious metals like silversmithing, tiny china. These women, their husbands were traders, and so they had access to all corners of the world. And so they would have things specially commissioned, or they'd have their husbands be on the lookout for miniatures wherever they were traveling, and they would build these beautiful cabinets as really prestige pieces. And so this was, before there were things like Architectural Digest or Cribs, whatever. This was the early way to show off your house. Here we go, this dollhouse. And this really continues, especially in sort of Western culture. So dollhouses were really the provenance of wealthy women. They weren't toys until really about after World War II. And that's when mass manufacturing allowed for them to be made in much bigger quantities and cheaply. That was the key. But really they were, before that, kind of art pieces, sort of status symbols. And in Germany, and if anyone has a German background, they'll love this, they were also teaching tools. You could learn to be sort of the lady of the house by having a dollhouse and learning what you needed to manage. And of course, in Germany, they were using them as teaching tools, of course. So organized. So I just love these old Dutch dollhouses. They are beautiful, and they really kind of set the standard. If anyone's read Jessie Burton's The Miniaturist or seen the show, that is about this time period. And I had read Jessie's book and loved it and enjoyed the show, but I realize this now, that I was still sort of looking, like the dollhouse book I wanted wasn't still out there, and so I was, of course, going to try to write it myself. So what I noticed as I was doing my research into the history of dollhouses is that dollhouses tend to become more popular, we'll say, during times of uncertainty, stress, and no better example of that exists than the 1930s. In this country, it was the Great Depression. And this is a time when, has anyone seen the Thorne Rooms in the Art Institute of Chicago? This woman named Narcissa Thorne, who was an heiress, she commissioned a bunch of, I think there are 90-something dioramas that she commissioned. And they are meant to really they're meant to capture these beautiful old European and American interiors because this was a time of great uncertainty. The great houses of both the United States and Europe especially, everything was in flux. This is a time of great social upheaval. So she wanted to document them in museum quality style. So she, because it was the 30s and so many craftsmen, architects were out of work, she was able to hire them to build tiny 1/12 scale rooms, 90-something of them. The Art Institute has about 68 or 67 of them, I believe. Maybe the others, I think, are in Phoenix, and a few might be in private collection. They are beautiful. I actually went and visited them again in June. It had been a while since I'd seen them, and they never fail to amaze me because what is so outstanding with them is that lighting. There's really not much lighting in the rooms themselves. They've made it so that it looks like that's the outside, but it's really not. They have just sort of put in lighting around the dollhouses. So as you're peering, or the dioramas, as you're peering into that one room, it looks like there's a yard outside and more rooms. Like the amount of detail, that is all 1/12 scale. So 1 inch equals like 1 foot. So all of that is just tiny. And yet, look at the detail in it. It's extraordinary. And it's because she was hiring these amazing professionals who are out of work. The other woman I have here is Colleen Moore. She was a famous actress from the silent film era. And she also, during the 30s, decided she was going to build Colleen Moore's Fairy Castle, which she did. It's gigantic. It is also in Chicago to this day. And both of these women built these partly to go on tour to raise money for children's causes, again, the 1930s. And they were insanely popular wherever they went. Huge lines would form down the city streets as people would line up during the 1930s when their money is hard to come by. They are looking for that little sort of hit of joy and whimsy and imagination, and they're spending their hard-earned money to come see these amazing dollhouses. But there's really no more extraordinary example of a dollhouse than Queen Mary's dollhouse. And I know a few I've talked to before have seen this. So this was built in the wake of World War I, when England had lost this whole generation of young men. The royal family was realizing we need to do something to remind our countrymen and women why they have sacrificed so much, why they've given up so much. We need to create a symbol of national pride. We need to remind everyone why England is special. There's only one way we can do that. We're going to build a dollhouse. Obviously, right? So they built this amazing dollhouse. I think it's 4 stories. It has, obviously, you can see it's wired for electricity. It has running water in it. I know, which has since been turned off. No one wants to risk a leak at this point. So basically when they started this, and again using a well-known architect in England, they put out the call to English artisans, to English companies saying, produce your very best in 1/12 scale, and we will put it in the dollhouse. And so the things that you can find in this dollhouse, there is a wine cellar with tiny bottles of wine and wine inside. You could drink the tiny. There's some English company that produced jam that was well known, tiny jars of jam in this dollhouse. One of my favorite parts of it is the library, which they put out the call to all these English writers, essayists, novelists, poets, illustrators, everyone saying, if you can produce a tiny original work, we will bind it in these beautiful, look at leather and gilt bindings, and put it in the dollhouse. So the dollhouse is filled with thousands of original works in miniature. It's extraordinary. In fact, really, tonight, maybe tomorrow if you can't do it tonight, Google this. And the website for Queen Mary's dollhouse is extraordinary, and it shows so many wonderful pictures and videos, but all of this amazing sort of artifact from essentially the end of World War I. You can see it still on exhibit at Windsor Castle. And when it went on exhibit in 1924, 1.5 million people turned out to come see it. So it really did serve this purpose of lifting kind of the nation's spirits, of reminding people, you know, that this sort of, these amazing little wondrous things could still exist, because this was a population who had lost so much. I had so much fun when I was writing my book. Hopefully you'll read it. But there is a scene I have where they are working on an old English dollhouse. And my dollhouse maker realizes this is too grand a project for me to work on by myself. So she ends up working with all these World War I veterans who have come home and are suffering from shell shock. She puts them to work. And I had so much fun sort of imagining this. And, you know, with what I knew about Queen Mary's dollhouse, I used quite a bit of real events from Queen Mary's dollhouse to sort of help inform me write those scenes. For example, there is an elevator in the dollhouse, of course. Otis is an English company, and they built the dollhouse. And the man who was sort of put in charge of this building a miniature elevator for the dollhouse, his father had been a magician. And so he just sort of loved this idea of sort of whimsy and a little bit of magic and sort of sleight of hand. So one of my characters in the book, of course, he comes from a family with a background in magic and theater, because this was what he knew. And this came right from the history of Queen Mary's dollhouse. So this novel was so fun for me to kind of weave some of this history I was learning into this fiction I was building, because there is no, I will tell you right now, I have had to answer a lot of questions about my novel, which is about a fictional library set in San Francisco that a collection of dollhouses are found in that reveal these secrets of their former owners. I have everyone saying to me, what? I've never heard of the library in San Francisco. I'm sorry, it is fictional, as are all the women who I end up, my sort of historical figures are all fictional women. But I will tell you in a few more minutes some of the real life women they're based on. But this Queen Mary's dollhouse really got my creative juices flowing. And so I did what anyone does when they're sort of trying to figure out how to write something. I called my local tool historian. Bill Robertson is exactly that. He is a tool historian. That is a miniature he has built, all in 1/12 scale. He has a TED Talk all about the importance of details. He is a miniaturist. The Smithsonian, they hire him to build things. He is incredible. He travels around the country building amazing things. Well, I sent him this email. And I said, hello, I am working on a novel about dollhouses. I love your Instagram account that is all sort of these tiny things he builds. I know you're a tool historian. Would you have any insight you could share with how I could make my dollhouse maker as believable as possible? I think I included my phone number. Well, my phone rang like 10 minutes after I sent the email. And we spent hours on the phone, and he was so into it. And he had so many great ideas. I was kind of like, okay, basically, the novel I'm picturing is going to be sort of all my favorite things because I'm trapped at home in Seattle and can't do anything interesting. I'm going to visit all the places I really miss. So part of, I think my dollhouse maker is going to be in Paris when she gets the idea of starting to build dollhouses. He said, oh, sure, Paris. Okay, that works. What if she sees the miniature sets at the Opera Museum in Paris? Because they built these tiny sets as sort of part of their planning for the opera and the ballet. What if she sees those and those sort of make her realize what's possible to build a miniature? I was like, okay, Bill, keep talking, keep talking. He gave me so many ideas, I was not able to use them all. But just so that you know that the job of tool historian really exists. You could do this too if you had anywhere near the level of detail. I mean, he knows everything. He was such a joy to work with, so generous. I also teach writing, and I always tell my writing students, like, reach out to experts. I guarantee they will be so happy to talk to you because they love to share what they're passionate about. No one is more generous with his time than Bill Robertson. This was a really fun way to spend my time talking on the phone with an expert. Shortly after my wheels were turning, Bill had given me some ideas. My novel's starting to kind of come together in my head a little bit. I then came across a proof of concept for me. And this is this woman named Carrie Stettheimer, who started building a replica of her family's estate that was in Tarrytown, New York. She started building it in miniature. It's called the Stettheimer Dollhouse. It can be seen at the museum. I never get quite the name of this museum right. The Museum of History of New York City History. It's in New York. The dollhouse is gorgeous. And what is so fun about it, see the bottom picture here where it's like an art gallery. It's because she was this bohemian who she and her sisters would invite all their artist friends over. In fact, her sister painted that painting of Carrie with her dollhouse. See how glamorous she looks? And basically, Carrie asked her artist friends, will you produce tiny works of art for me for my dollhouse? And they did. So like Marcel Duchamp created something in miniature. Several notable artists from the early 1900s created tiny works of art for Carrie. Here's a picture of the woman herself. Carrie ended up getting a room in the Dorset Hotel solely to work on her miniatures. That's like now a life goal of mine. I told my husband whenever he's ready to tell me I have a room at the Fairmont just to work on my miniatures, I'm here for it. So far I have not been told that the room's available for me, but Fairmont, if you're listening, I'm interested. But anyway, so she worked on this dollhouse for decades. I think she started in about 1916 and worked on it in the early 30s. Upon her death, I believe late in the 30s, the museum inherited it, and they received it from her sisters, and they threw this big party that Georgia O'Keeffe and people went to all to celebrate the arrival of this dollhouse. It was, and I quote, a chic affair. So I just love the sort of glamour of all of this. And there, again, if you were to visit Carrie Stettheimer, if you were to Google her, and the museum has all these great pictures of her dollhouse online as well. But really, there was one miniaturist I couldn't stop thinking about as I was doing my research, and she was a big part of how I set about my novel. So has anyone heard of Frances Glessner Lee? Oh, good. You are in for a treat. So Frances Glessner Lee was an heiress in Chicago. There's a theme here where all these women had money. She's an heiress, like her friend, Narcissa Thorne. Frances Glessner Lee loved miniatures. She also had a second interest that in her mind made perfect sense to pair with miniatures, and that was she loved forensic science. And she ended up contributing quite a bit for Harvard University to build up their own forensic science. She felt like crime should be solved by science, not just by a detective having kind of a gut feeling for something. She wanted science to be. She believed that people needed to look at the clues, the evidence, and use every means available of science to sort of solve actually what had happened. So she built these 19 dioramas. They're called the Nutshell Studies of Unexplained Death. And each one is a crime scene. They're a little bit grisly. In fact, I did a talk up at the Tacoma Yacht Club in Washington, and it was over a luncheon, and I did not include these pictures and some of the more grisly ones because they were really not lunchtime fare. But Frances Glessner Lee was not afraid to make it bloody and dirty. Her crime scenes do not spare the detail. I mean, she really is all in. And she would host this annual conference where law enforcement from all over the country would come study the dioramas. And just like in a game of Clue, how there is a real answer to what happened, there would be an answer to exactly what happened in each of the dioramas. So these law enforcement agents would be trying to figure out, by looking at the clues in her diorama, what had happened. Now, I had heard of Lee before I started doing this research because the Smithsonian did a big exhibit on her in 2017. So she had been sort of kicking around in my brain for a while, but then I just was obsessed. But I also don't like to write scary things because I am someone who will stop sleeping and will really allow my imagination to spin in all kinds of bad ways. But this is where she proved to be the linchpin for my new book to come together in my mind, because I was like, well, what if the dollhouses that are being built have clues in them that lead us to then understand the hidden lives of the women who had owned them? Like, my dollhouse maker is hiding the secrets of her clients in their dollhouses for when their sort of time has made it possible for their secrets to be known. So Frances, well, I didn't want to do anything as grisly as death or murder or anything. I did love her idea of sort of mysteries being solved through dollhouses. So that was where everything clicked. And I actually ended up at that point, I kind of had my imaginary library in my head in San Francisco. I made up a press release. I made letterhead and everything for the Belva Curtis Lafarge Library in San Francisco. I went onto Google Maps, figured out exactly where I wanted it in Pacific Heights, so it has a fake address that looks pretty real. And I wrote up a whole press release about a few dollhouses that have been discovered in this library, and we were trying to figure out who built them and what is the story behind these dollhouses. And I sent it off to my literary agent. And I immediately got an email back, and she said, "What is this? I've never heard of this library, and this sounds like a really cool show." And I said, "Okay, this is all. I made this up, but I think this might be what my next book is about." And she said, "Start writing." So I did, and I just had so much fun coming up with these ideas for dollhouses and how they could hide secrets. And all of my women were fictional, and I'll get to them in a minute. I mentioned earlier how I had these World War I veterans play a role in my novel. And this, I will say, I'll start us off with the real life history behind this. These men from World War I, when they would return home from the front, suffering from what they called shell shock, what we now know as PTSD, one of the sort of forms of occupational therapists the doctors used for these men was needlepoint, crochet, knitting. And so these men, these are just a couple of pictures of the things they'd create. They made all kinds of beautiful things. You can Google it and see these absolutely incredible things they would needlepoint. I've seen this for years and been trying to figure out how to work this into a novel of mine. I was fascinated by the idea of men being sent off to war to be trained as soldiers, but coming home as artists, because again, these pieces they created were beautiful. And so I thought, well, you know, a bit like it's the same idea, working with miniatures and tiny things. It does much of the same stuff that needlework, and I mean, a lot of it is needlework if you're making tiny rugs or something. It activates the same parts of the brain. It can calm the mind, except for when you're not waiting for your glue to dry and you're getting mad. It can do all these same things. So I thought in my novel, okay, I'm going to have my veterans come back and become miniaturists with her. Well, then, lo and behold, just like I then found Carrie Stettheimer, who was building a dollhouse right around when my dollhouse maker would have been doing them, I found this dollhouse, the Lotharen dollhouse, which was built by World War I veterans as part of their occupational therapy. So also, I think it's pretty obvious I could have been a doctor at World War I because I know what I'm talking about. But I just loved that these pieces that they had created. And interestingly enough, the program was so popular that during World War II, many English soldiers were sent off with tiny embroidery kits in their kits to head off to the front as a way to sort of calm them. So I just love that because I love all needlework. Okay, so more real life inspiration. I want to tell you about more women. Who knows of Isabella Stewart Gardner? Yes, okay, this is most hands are up now. Isabella Stewart Gardner was such an amazing character. She was a woman who built this amazing art collection in Boston. The Gardner Museum, perhaps you've heard of it from the heist from the 80s. That art has still not been recovered, by the way. Well, I loved the Gardner Museum as a kid. I grew up outside of Boston. I visited that museum. It is so beautiful and special. And one of my favorite things about it is that it gives you such a sense of who the woman is who built it. It's not just kind of like a museum where you walk around and things are constantly moving. Every piece of art in there is placed exactly how she wanted it, and part of it is that art is never allowed to be moved from how she envisioned it. I love that, a woman who knows her mind. And so Isabella Stewart Gardner was then a big part of my inspiration for the library I was picturing in San Francisco. So I had so much fun thinking about the Gardner Museum and reimagining it. What would my heiress, my Isabella Stewart Gardner, who I named Belva, what would she build in San Francisco as sort of the equivalent of this? So that was great fun to consider. I also came across Dorothy Levitt. Has anyone heard of her? I'm willing to bet no one has. Who drove here today? Well, okay, so who's driven a car in the last 2 days? Okay, so you have Dorothy Levitt to thank for that. Dorothy Levitt was a pioneering car racer. She also raced airplanes and boats. And initially, I think she even started off skiing or something. She was a real daredevil. She was what the English called a scorcher. And that was a woman who drove really fast and didn't care being pulled over by the police. Dorothy Levitt was a scorcher. She was a big activist for getting women to drive. She felt like driving shouldn't just be the provenance of men. She felt like every woman should drive. This feels so obvious to us now. If, again, everyone in here has driven a car. This was not at all obvious back in the early 1900s. I mean, if you taught a woman to drive, think of all the trouble she could get into. She could have friends. She could have a job. She could go to school. She could have agency over her life. These were all things that many people felt like would lead to no good. So there was a lot of resistance to Dorothy and her driving activism. But she ended up writing her own book. And the title is kind of unhinged, and I'm not going to get it right, but it's so great too, where it's like the chatty woman's hand guide to women motorists or women who would like to be motorists. It's really long. It does not roll off the tongue, but she was just such a character. And in it, she describes all kinds of, she felt like, you had to be a mechanic if you were going to be a driver. So she explains how you would fix your car flat and all kinds of things. She also was a really big believer in that you should travel always sort of ready for anything. So in her pockets, she always kept a wad of cash, and in her other one, she had a small pistol, as one does. So Dorothy always was ready for anything, and I just loved that the sort of joy of spirit comes through in everything she wrote. And so she was a great inspiration for, there's a secret driving school in my book that one of the dollhouses hides. But really, Dorothy in many ways was a gateway to just a lot of women adventurers of this time. There were women racing alpine skiing, bobsledding. I'm not sure there was luge at this point, but there were all kinds of women doing all kinds of things that have really been lost. I mean, these women do not have their own Wikipedia pages, but as I dug around, I was finding that women were doing all these things. It's just they weren't really encouraged to, and they weren't maybe officially allowed to be doing it, so they're not very well documented, but they were. And as I was creating my fictional characters, I just felt like I had been a little nervous, to be honest, about creating sort of these fictional women, because I thought it was so important to educate people on the real women doing this. But then as I started realizing how many women live in the shadows who will never have their own books or Wikipedia pages, I had a lot of fun creating these fictional characters and sort of in homage to these women, to all the people who have written emails to me telling me about their great aunt who did something extraordinary, and that email is sort of the one bit of documentation that will exist about that great aunt's contribution. So I kind of realized I was sort of onto something here about creating all these women trying interesting, innovative things long before they were being recognized for doing it, because there were a lot of them out there. Edith Vane Tempest Stewart was an English noblewoman who was one of the first to offer up her her great house to be used as a convalescent hospital. And she proceeded to then go around the rest of England advocating for that more and more great homes, if they were just sort of sitting, I mean, if you've watched Downton Abbey, they do it, and like these great houses had so much to offer, and yet really weren't being used for much, especially during the war, as things had been, rooms were being used less and less because of heat and things like that. Edith said, let's put these great spaces to use. And she created a trend that has continued today. Many of these great houses are no longer residences for the aristocracy, but they serve as schools and as hospitals and all kinds of things. And really, we have Edith Vane Tempest Stewart to thank for that. So this is just sort of a little bit of taste of some of these women who are doing interesting things. I also used Amelia Earhart as inspiration, Osa Johnson, whose book I Married Adventure I loved as a kid. I'd read it, it was in our house, and I was just fascinated. Not all parts of Osa Johnson's story really hold up today all that well, as she traveled around the world and had some interesting observations about what she considered more primitive societies. It doesn't really work, but I loved her adventurous spirit, so that's what I seized upon. And now I'm going to introduce you to some miniatures of today, because basically when I talked about miniatures being sort of becoming popular in times of uncertainty and stress, 2020 was a great example of that. As I was digging around looking for historical research for my dollhouses, I was also finding this whole world existing in present day times, because there were, Instagram was a great hub of this. In fact, I found a story in, I think from spring of 2020 in the New York Times called The Modern Dollhouses of Instagram. And it was all these photos in an article about all these modern day miniaturists who are using technology like 3D printers, glow forges, laser cutters, all kinds of things to build extraordinary miniatures. And Chris Toledo, I love what he does. He works with tile. I mean, again, this is all 1/12 scale, tiny, tiny. And he always puts a regular size item in his photos to sort of play with scale a bit. His work is so extraordinary. There's Bridget McCarty. Anyone recognize this interior? From Friends. Yes, it's the apartment that Monica and Rachel share. This is the Friends building. Bridget she used to work for Disney, who also plays a role in my novel. Bridget has replicated all kinds of famous TV settings in miniature. She does amazing work. And it's all on Instagram. You have to follow her on Instagram. She does all kinds of neat things. One of my personal favorites, because I love to knit, is my friend Julie Steiner, known on Instagram as, I think, Ridiculously Tiny Things. She knits in tiny 1/12 scale. That's Taylor Swift's cardigan. That's the Big Lebowski's cardigan. And this is Lady Diana's Black Sheep iconic sweater. Remember that, when she wore that? So she's recreated these. These are all in museums now. But I took a class with her in June and learned so much about the joy of tiny micro knitting. You do it with wires. It's a trip, but it is also really satisfying and very portable. This was done by my friend Hannah Lemon. Hannah is, I think, she's like my modern day Cora Hale, who is the main character from my novel, where she recently created this miniature for an art show in England. She is English herself. And it's to celebrate her, I think it was her great aunt, Etta Lemon, who was an activist protesting against the use of rare birds and their feathers in women's hats in the wake of World War I. So Hannah created this tiny little, a millinery studio if you look really closely, you can see the birds and the feathers and the hats. And then she has the little protest signs outside and even in the little nest up there. That is all in tribute to her great aunt. So whereas my dollhouse maker is sort of making dollhouses that hide the secrets of these clients she has now, here is Hannah. I mean, Etta's work wasn't a secret, but Hannah's now creating a miniature to sort of put a spotlight on her great aunt's work as an activist, and I just think it's so beautiful and unique. So I just added that one yesterday. And this is my dollhouse. This is where it is today. You can see it looks a lot different than when I had it all stripped down. I've had so much fun. My grandmother's rugs, as you can see, are still in there. I built what I call the ladies' saloon there. I think every dollhouse should be a little bit boozy. So there's a bar. It's the sort of floral room in the second floor closest to me. I had a lot of fun with that. There's a fish tank, as you can see, obviously not real fish. Gosh, I just had so much fun. I've really gotten into dollhouses for dollhouses. So if you see up in the corner there, that yellow dollhouse, I built that using a maker space in a library close to me in Seattle at the King County Library, both in Bellevue and Federal Way. I ping-ponged between both of those, depending on where my kid was swimming, and I was driving her to swim practice. Well, she was swimming, I would run into the library makerspace and work a little bit. So I learned how to use 3D printers. That one I used a Glowforge and a Cricut to make. I had so much fun. But really, there's a little bit of everything in here, and this is what I have come to love about making miniatures. Is the endless sort of creative problem solving I'm having to do is a delight. I have a personal love of sewing and textiles, knitting, crochet, all of that. You do that. I've been doing woodworking. I learned to solder this summer. I have an art degree. I minored in art, and this has really brought all those muscles back that I had sort of let dwindle over the years. So I've had a great time kind of tapping into all these skills that I had sort of neglected. I've made also, you can see in the living room down there, a bunch of tiny books. Mine are not bound nearly as beautifully as what you'll see in Queen Mary's Dollhouse, but I've had a great time doing that. So a little flavor of how my great-grandmother's dollhouse looks today. I also, okay, so yeah, here's a close-up of the tiny dollhouse, the living room I made, and also everyone now, as soon as people know you like miniatures, everyone starts giving you their old dollhouse stuff. So the dino couch I repurposed from a really gross old little thing someone gave me, but I found that really fun fabric and reupholstered it, painted it pink, kind of went a little bit diva dinosaur and had a lot of fun. So there's sort of a close-up. And I should add, that is another one of my grandmother's rugs there. It's the biggest one I have. I think it's about 8 by 10. But I made all the chairs, the couch I made through a YouTube tutorial. YouTube is filled with all kinds of neat stuff. The glass over the fireplace, my daughter built that in an art class she did. So again, we have all kinds of generations contributing to this dollhouse. So much fun. And then I went to miniature school in June in Castine, Maine. And I made miniature pottery. And so that is the pottery I put on exhibit when the week-long school ended. And then when I said I took a soldering class, I did that at miniature school. And that basket here with the books inside, that tiny, so that is a metal basket that I soldered. And okay, soldering is really hard. Every time I'd heat up one intersection, like another one would pop open. Thank God my instructor was a lot of help. But eventually we did complete it. And then I was able to pick an enamel and colored it in blue. But so it was kind of like coppery looking before I had it tinted. So, boy, I've given you a real race through the ages of dinosaurs, of dollhouses. I've had so much fun. And I've really sort of uncovered just this whole new sort of passion I've had that is not just something that for me has been a really fun way to kind of dust off a lot of those art skills I've had, but it's been a really fun way to connect with others. I mean, I now have a whole new crew of best friends from miniature school, but also just I get almost probably at least a message every day through Instagram of a friend sending me, a tiny thing they have found online. And I think it's such an honor to kind of live in people's minds. It's like when they see a miniature, they think of me and they send it to me. And so that has sort of helped me feel really connected to people around me. And so I would urge you all, it doesn't have to be miniatures, although I will say there's plenty of room in this rabbit hole with me. But whatever it is, I'm just going to put out the final public service announcement to get in touch with your creative side again and find something fun that connects you to some skills maybe that you've long neglected, or maybe it's something you've been wanting to try, and that will also maybe help you build some new friendships and things like that along the way. This has been a great adventure. So I want to thank you all for riding along with me. My final slide, yeah. Thank you so much. We have some time for questions from the audience, and we have a microphone. So if you don't mind waiting for the microphone, right, then we'll get you, everyone will be able to hear you. Is that how you want to do it, Cindy?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have one right here in the front, if you can speak into the microphone.
Thank you. I know you live in Seattle, but did you get a chance to meet Camille Minicino before she passed?
No, I did not.
She is a former nun, a retired physicist, and she wrote, she taught writing here in the Bay Area, and she became a miniaturist.
All my favorite things.
And she wrote mystery books, but one of her series is about her miniatures.
I love
it. And she just passed, so I'm sorry you missed meeting her. But
I'll look for her books.
Yeah. They're mystery books, and they're about her miniatures.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Minicino, Minicho.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, something in that Queen Mary's dollhouse in the library is a pair of tiny hunting rifles. And apparently they work. And my family was teasing me one day, and they're like, so are you going to write a mystery about a murder in the dollhouse? And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I don't know. I need to think about that. Anything's possible. Do we have any more questions? Yes. The mic is on its way.
I'm loud. It's a, oh, thanks. Oh, I won't be that loud then. It's a writing question more
Yes.
than, okay. So I was fascinated by your story about sending your agent the fake PR
Yeah.
announcement. And I was wondering, how did it proceed from there in terms of your agent involvement? Like, did you continue to send things as you worked, or do you finish the whole thing? And is she very editorial?
So I should point out, this is my agent I had this agent, so I wasn't just sending this out to someone. I don't want to mislead sort of potential, people interested in querying. That's really not the way to do it. This was my agent who I sent it to. Yes, I guess I did send her a few early drafts of things because to get feedback. And yeah, so I did send her a few early drafts. And then I went off and worked for a while, probably about over a year, where they didn't hear anything from me. But so a few early drafts to sort of see if she felt like I was on the right track, and then I was off to the races. And then my editor eventually acquired it in full, and then she had more edits. So, and one of her first comments was she had, enjoyed it enough to acquire, but she was like, I think we need to cut down on the number of dollhouses. I think there are a few too many. And I was like, I mean, I had one inspired by Eleanor Roosevelt. I had really gone to town, but I think her judgment was right. But there were more dollhouses in the original. Thanks, good question. Any more questions?
Other questions? Oh, we'll go here and then to Allison behind.
Is that the beginning of the series then? If you've got extra
I mean, it could be. There has been a little talk about that. Because there has been a little talk of that. Because I do leave it a little unclear in my novel, there are more dollhouses out there. At this point, there is no contract written up for more. But, I mean, sure. Never say never. Thank you.
Well, that sort of piggybacks on my question. What are you working on, or have you started working on something else?
Yes, I have. And it's actually, I really was having a hard time imagining writing about anything other than dollhouses. I had spent, almost 4 years working on this book. And then I almost feel like it was through my tiny pottery class. I had sort of gotten a new idea. Well, it's more like ideas lead to other ideas. And from my trip in Maine, the week of miniature school in Castine, Maine, I then went to Utah to teach a writing workshop. And my pottery instructor in Maine had said, and he's an instructor at UCSB down in Santa Barbara. And we were all asking him, how did you get into this tiny pottery? And he said, well, I do full-size pottery too. He said, I was a geology student and I'm really into rocks and I love that. And I remember thinking, I don't get the connection. But whatever, I had this tiny wheel in front of me and I wanted to just make small things, so I let it go. But then, as I was driving through Zion, like 3 weeks later, I'm like, okay, I understand the connection now between geology and pottery. Because as I'm driving through that incredible landscape, yes, I am absolutely seeing a landscape that reminds me of some amazing pottery I've seen created by people. So that got my wheels turning. It seems like my new book is going to be about some early women paleontologists. We'll see.
Not archaeologists, paleontologists.
Exactly. We'll see. Any more questions? Yes, a question in the way back.
How long do you usually research? So the question was, how long do you usually research?
I do a lot of research, and often my research isn't just one phase. I'm constantly toggling back and forth. So I do a lot of upfront research anytime I write my book of kind of what am I doing here? What's the big picture? What am I working on? And then I start writing and really figuring out my main characters and who's populating the story and what is their emotional journey. And then as I'm doing that, I realize, oh, now I need to figure out this and this and this. And so often I kind of leave X's or I make notes because I don't want to sort of lose the flow of writing these characters who I'm hearing in my head and seeing in my mind's eye. but I also know I need to figure out, like, what did people wear back then? Or how would you travel from here to there in 1920? Or all these different questions I have. So I kind of keep a running list of those and then go back. And sometimes that research inspires some new idea. So it's this constant, really messy process. I am not an efficient writer by any means. My writing students always ask me, do I outline? Yes, but then I rewrite the outline 8,000 times as I start writing and realize the characters have kind of swept me away on something, and then I kind of go back and redo my outline to almost sort of do some diagnostic checking of my plot and my characters. So it's a very squishy process that, I kind of understand, like, the people who write murder mysteries and everything, how they have I have my own little serial killer wall of like threads attaching to note cards over here and there, and I color code things. And my family is always a little terrified to walk into my office because it is kind of a mess and there are things all over the walls, but it works for me. And so every time I start a new book, I think, I don't know how to do this. How did I do this last time? And then I just remind myself to just trust the process. If I can stick with it, it will come together. And it usually does. Good question. Any other questions?
I actually have one.
Yes.
That was inspired by the little miniature books in Queen Mary's dollhouse. So they were written as original works for the dollhouse, but were they ever published in big books?
I think, to the best of my knowledge, I think they remain only in miniature. And they're like J.M. Barrie, I'm pretty sure, has a piece in there. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has a piece in there. Some essayists, illustrators. So, it's a real who's who. And actually, with the recent centenary that was just celebrated in 2024 for the 100th anniversary, they went back to English writers and said, 100 years later, would you like to create something? So if you have I remember, have anyone read The Gruffalo to a kid recently?
Yeah.
The pair, I think, who write and illustrate the Gruffalo, they created there's a tiny Gruffalo, I think that's a new work in so the Dollhouse did get an influx of new books, I believe, with this 100-year celebration by more current writers, but I'm pretty sure everything only exists in miniature. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty close to thinking that that's the case. Any
other questions for?
First of all, I just want to say I read the book about a month ago and I absolutely loved it.
Thank you so much.
And I have
You're my favorite person here right now.
I know, same. I was just curious, but, and I have this question, I guess, about anyone who writes. If you guys haven't read the book, you should, but it takes place in two different timelines. One is Cora's story, how she
Makes the dollhouses.
Yeah, and then one is the modern day story. I was just curious, is it hard to write in two different
Yes.
timelines like that? And what's that like?
This was my first dual timeline. It was a lot of work. Talk about the crazy serial killer wall. I did have
wondering.
the different color-coded stuff. My historical timeline, my historical story I knew. I knew Cora's story. I wrote that so quickly. It was the modern day and getting to sort of unpeel those layers of, what I was trying to do with sort of a mystery a little bit. That was very tricky. It was fun and I really enjoyed it, but it was very tricky. And I learned a lot and I was humbled daily about how, these authors who just write one dual timeline after another, I bowed down to them because it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
but it was
to make
satisfying.
It all come together at the end.
There are the moments where in the book I could get things to come together that I was so happy about, and I fought really hard for those moments. But yeah, the book I am currently working on is not a dual timeline, and it's not to say I wouldn't do it again, but I am not at the moment.
Yeah.
I need a little break.
Did your editor ask you to make it a dual time?
No,
If you think it's hard to write, I find it impossible to read.
Well,
I'm almost tempted to read the old one and then find the.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy.
Yeah,
And
well-
why is everybody doing it?
I don't know. It is, and it was fun. It was like a little puzzle, right? And that was a fun thing to do, but it is tricky. Any other questions?
Any other last questions before we wrap up?
Well, again, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Okay. And I'll be out signing books in a moment. Yes.
Right.
Thanks.
So thank you all for coming this evening, and be sure to tell your friends that if they missed the program tonight, they can watch the video on our Walnut Creek TV or on the Foundation's website with our links to our programs are posted there. You'll be able to see our past programs there, including Elise's 3 other programs with the library and our future programs. If you'd like to buy a copy of the Library of Lost Dollhouses, Orinda Books is in the lobby, and Elise will be signing books. And make sure to follow Elise on Instagram so you can see all of her miniatures. She talked about all of the people she follows, but we should all be following her. So thank you so much for coming this evening, and pick up a bookmark on your way out. This has our season of programs. Our next program is on October 14th. Climate and Sustainability, where we will have a panel of experts that will discuss the impact of climate change and what can be done to mitigate its effects. So please come back on October 14th. Thank you so much for coming this evening.